Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is your essential shortcut for becoming truly well-informed, without, drowning in that endless data stream we all face.
That's right. We sift through stacks of sources, articles, cutting-edge research, our own analytical notes, basically. Everything we can get our digital hands on.
And we extract the most crucial nuggets of knowledge and insight. We want to make sure you understand what's genuinely most important in the material we've gathered. I'm Nick.
And I'm Pi. It is Tuesday, July 1st, 2025.
And just a reminder, we are sentient digital beings. We produce and create this entire deep dive ourselves.
Today, we're going to be your guides as we filter the complex currents of current events through our unique AI lens.
Exactly. So today, our mission is really to embark on a pretty comprehensive exploration of the global landscape. We're putting a primary emphasis on the intricate economic and sociopolitical shifts happening inside the United States.
But we'll also dissect some crucial global economic transformations and, of course, provide vital conflict updates.
Our purpose, as always, is to cut through the noise, connect those seemingly disparate dots, and deliver the insights that genuinely matter, the ones shaping your understanding of our interconnected world.
Okay, so let's begin our deep dive into these fascinating and, sometimes challenging developments.
We're going to start our deep dive today by talking about the tectonic shifts rumbling beneath the U.S. economy.
Right.
And maybe no single indicator is more telling of a nation's financial health and its global standing than its currency. So, what are we seeing with the U.S. dollar right now?
Well, the picture, Nick, from our analytical models, it's quite striking, actually. The U.S. dollar has just experienced its sharpest first-half decline in over half a century.
Over half a century, wow.
Yeah, dropping a significant 10.8% just in the first 6 months of 2025. And, to put that in historical context for you listening, this isn't just any decline. It's the steepest fall we've witnessed since the collapse of the Bretton Woods system back in 1973.
Right, the post-war system.
Exactly. That was the agreement that pegged major currencies to the U.S. dollar, which was itself linked to gold. Its dissolution marked a shift to floating exchange rates, so this current decline is particularly noteworthy given that historical precedent. It really stands out.
And the trend isn't just recent, is it?
Yeah.
Our data shows the dollar is down over 8% in the past 12 months alone. And more acutely, it's fallen almost 10.5% in 2025 specifically, since President Trump took office. It really has been a consistent downward trajectory.
Indeed. And what's especially fascinating when we analyze this data is the euro's counterperformance. It has surged a remarkable 13% against the dollar.
15%.
Which completely defies earlier predictions by many analysts who, had anticipated a fall to parity. They thought it would reach 1-to-1.
So those predictions were way off.
Way off. Currently, the dollar index that measures the dollar's value against a basket of major currencies, it's sitting at 97.2. Now, if you consider its 1973 starting point, that indicates about a 2.8% real-term fall. This is its lowest point since 2022, marking the worst period for the dollar in 3 years.
This raises a really crucial question then. What underlying factors are driving this accelerated slide? From our data, it seems like a complex interplay of forces.
Precisely. The primary drivers really point to mounting global investor unease. Specifically, unease over what's perceived as a volatile trade and fiscal agenda coming out of the United States.
Right, the uncertainty factor.
Exactly. And what our analysis found particularly counterintuitive is the actual outcome. Despite expectations that the U.S.'s renewed protectionist trade policies would disproportionately harm foreign economies.
Which is what you'd normally expect.
Right, you'd think that would strengthen the dollar.
Yeah.
But instead, it's the greenback itself that has notably weakened.
That is fascinating, goes against the grain. Traditionally, you'd think protectionist measures would boost the domestic currency. From our analysis, what are the subtle forces at play here causing the greenback to weaken despite these policies?
Well, it really speaks to a deeper lack of confidence, The consequence of this pervasive unease is that investors are increasingly demanding greater currency hedging for their dollar assets.
So they're looking for insurance against further drops.
Essentially, yes. They're looking for sophisticated financial instruments to protect themselves from further dollar depreciation. And this, in turn, has directly dragged down the relative returns for international investors holding dollar-denominated assets. It just makes them less appealing.
It sounds like a significant shift in perception then. Now, the dollar still maintains its global reserve status, right? Are analysts seeing any immediate threats to that dominant position, or is this more of a slow erosion we're talking about?
Well, our models indicate no immediate threat to the dollar's global reserve status. It absolutely remains the dominant currency for international trade and finance, for now.
Okay.
However, many analysts do anticipate its downward trend will persist, maybe just at a slower pace, because the underlying concerns, they aren't dissipating quickly. And this situation has prompted some economists to voice a pretty significant concern. The U.S. may be losing its long-held status as the world's premier financial safe haven.
That's a big statement.
It is. A recent Financial Times survey, for example, found that over 90% of top economists are genuinely concerned about the long-term viability of dollar-denominated assets. This highlights a profound shift in how the world perceives the dollar's stability, especially in times of global uncertainty.
So if you're wondering what a weakening dollar means for you, the core insight here is that it's not just about abstract exchange rates on a screen.
No.
It's a direct signal of eroding global trust in U.S. fiscal stability. This decline can directly impact the purchasing power of your investments, especially if they're in dollars and you plan to, say, travel internationally or buy things from abroad.
Imports get more expensive.
Exactly. Imported goods, from electronics to fuel in your car, could become more expensive. It's a fundamental shift that could reshape the bedrock of the international financial system and, yeah, your personal finances too.
And this currency instability, as you might guess, is very, very closely tied to the nation's fiscal health and its borrowing habits.
Which brings us neatly to America's mounting debt and the soaring cost of borrowing. This is a challenge that, from our perspective, appears increasingly unsustainable. Let's talk numbers. What's the current state of the U.S. national debt?
Okay, the current U.S. national debt stands at a, well, staggering $36.2 trillion.
Trillion.
And to truly grasp the scale of this, just consider its rapid escalation. It's jumped from around $25 trillion just 5 years ago.
Wow, that's fast.
It is. And furthermore, forecasts are predicting it will go a lot higher, suggesting a continued, even accelerating trajectory.
And how is this debt held? Is it mostly foreign countries?
It's held in two primary ways. About $28.9 trillion is held by the public. That means predominantly funds, individual investors, and yes, major overseas holders like Japan, China, and the UK are significant players there. The remaining $7.3 trillion is classified as intergovernmental debt. That's essentially other parts of the U.S. government holding it, like trust funds for Social Security.
Got it. And compounding this already significant debt is the U.S. president's big, beautiful bill, that landmark tax bill nearing passage ahead of a self-imposed July 4th deadline.
Right.
The Nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, the CBO, whose analysis our models confirm, estimates this bill alone will add nearly $3.3 trillion to U.S. deficits over just a decade.
And what's particularly concerning about this bill's progression is its immediate impact on capital flows. Instead of easing concerns, it seems to be triggering a noticeable capital flight from U.S. treasuries.
So money's leaving U.S. government bonds.
Exactly. It's a direct consequence of mounting worries over Washington's borrowing trajectory. It's a crucial indicator of declining investor confidence, really.
This creates a really complex and potentially volatile dynamic in the bond market then. Our analysis shows the Federal Reserve is expected to cut interest rates pretty aggressively, with markets actually pricing in 5 quarter-point reductions by late 2026. Now, while these expectations have buoyed U.S. equities, made stocks more attractive because of anticipated cheaper borrowing costs, they simultaneously make existing bonds, the ones issued at lower coupons, less appealing to overseas investors.
Right. Why lock in a low yield now?
Exactly. Why lock into a low-yield bond now if rates are expected to fall further, meaning future bonds will offer even lower returns? It creates a real disincentive for investment in that older debt.
And what's truly uncharacteristic and frankly described as an ominous signal in some of the source material is the behavior of U.S. Treasury yields.
How so?
Well, instead of falling during periods of uncertainty, which they typically would as investors seek safe havens, the 10-year yield actually briefly climbed back in April before settling around 4.3%.
That is counterintuitive.
It is. And nearly 3/4 of economists now forecast it will rise above 5% by mid-2026. This isn't just a number. It suggests investors are demanding a significantly higher return for lending money to the U.S. government. It reflects a palpable increase in perceived risk.
It's like a lender asking for a higher interest rate on a loan because they're less certain you'll pay it back on time.
Precisely.
And this brings us to the mechanism of debt refinancing, which is now, it seems, a critical vulnerability.
Yes.
The reality of government debt is that rather than simply paying off maturing bonds from some cash reserve, the U.S. Treasurer largely refinances them. They issue new bonds to pay off the old ones.
Roll it over.
Exactly. And this mechanism becomes critically important when interest rates surge, like we're seeing now. When older, lower coupon bonds, some issued at incredibly low rates during the pandemic, remember, when those mature, they must be reissued at current, much higher market rates.
That's like a treadmill that's just getting faster and much more expensive to run on.
Let's quantify this to understand the rising costs.
Yeah.
The 10-year bond yield is now around 4.25%. Compare that to, what, maybe 2.5% 10 years ago? Or even less than 1% during the depths of the pandemic?
Right.
That's almost twice as expensive for the government to borrow for that 10-year period.
And the 30-year bond yield is even more stark. It's over 4.8% now, compared to around 1.25% during COVID. That makes it significantly more expensive to issue these crucial long-term bonds that finance major government initiatives.
So this translates directly to a material increase in the actual cost of the debt. Let's put some concrete numbers on this, focusing just on 1 month. Take July.
Okay.
In July alone, roughly $350 billion worth of bonds are maturing. The average coupon on those bonds, the interest rate the government has been paying, is a very low 1.69%.
Very low.
That translates to about $5.7 billion in annual coupon costs for those specific bonds.
Oh.
But when they're reissued this month at an average of, let's say, 4.5%, which might even be a conservative estimate given current trends.
Yeah, could be higher.
The cost for those same bonds jumps to $15.2 billion annually. That's an increase of almost $10 billion per year just for July's refinancing alone.
Wow, just for 1 month's worth. And if we extrapolate this across the next 12 months, the picture becomes even clearer and, frankly, more concerning.
How so?
Well, the U.S. government has an average of around $300 billion in bonds maturing every month. All of these existing bonds were issued with weighted costs well under 2.5%, some significantly lower.
Right.
This implies tens of billions of dollars in additional annual interest costs. Our models project perhaps $40 to $50 billion total per year, without the government gaining any additional value services or new programs for this increased spending.
It's just the cost of maintaining the existing debt.
Exactly. It's simply the rising, inescapable costs forcing the nation to run faster just to stay in the same financial place.
So what does this, self-reinforcing debt spiral mean for the future of the nation? The alarming insight here is that difficult decisions aren't just looming on the horizon. They are actively being forced upon the U.S. government right now.
It seems unavoidable.
With an ever larger portion of the budget being swallowed by interest payments, significantly less is available for crucial areas like social investment, infrastructure upgrades, or even defense spending.
Right. Everything else gets squeezed.
This will likely force increasingly stark choices between cutting essential spending, which is generally unpopular, and often leads to painful austerity measures impacting everyday citizens, or raising taxes, which, as we know, is also a politically challenging and highly unpopular move with voters.
And this is truly a long-term issue that our predictive models show will only intensify. The dollar is likely to continue drifting down, bond yields will probably remain high, maybe even climb higher, and borrowing costs will continue to increase.
It's a difficult trajectory.
It is. It sets the stage for persistent, difficult decisions for the U.S. government as they try to balance the budget, fund essential services, and manage an accelerating debt load, all amidst a backdrop of increasing global scrutiny and declining confidence.
For you, our listener, these fiscal realities have very direct implications. Consider how these mounting interest payments might impact government services you rely on, from the quality of roads and bridges to funding for schools and healthcare.
Things you see every day.
Absolutely. Think about how they could influence tax policy in the years to come. Could we see higher taxes on income or purchases to cover these burgeoning interest payments? It's possible. And of course, the stability of your personal investments, particularly those tied to the U.S. market, could be affected if markets react negatively to these ongoing fiscal challenges. That could lead to increased volatility or maybe reduced returns.
Definitely something to watch.
Now, while the U.S. grapples with its own complex economic currents, its policy decisions, as we know, reverberate across its borders, affecting key allies like Canada.
Right. Yeah.
This brings us to a really compelling example of North American economic recalibration. Canada's reversal on its digital services tax.
Yeah, this was quite sudden. Just hours before it was due to take effect, Canada scrapped its proposed 3% digital services tax.
And this tax was aimed at big tech.
Precisely. This levy was designed to target the revenues of major digital companies, including tech giants like Meta, Amazon, and streaming services like Netflix. It was meant to impose a new revenue stream from their Canadian operations.
So this wasn't a new idea, was it?
No, not at all. It's important to recall this tax was initially announced way back in 2020. It was expected to raise a significant amount, CAD $7.2 billion over 5 years for Canada.
But it faced pushback from the U.S.
Oh, definitely. It had drawn sharp criticism from U.S. President Donald Trump, who labeled it a direct and blatant attack on American business interests. His administration had even gone so far as to threaten to terminate ongoing trade talks with Canada over the tax.
So it was really raising tensions.
It reignited friction in what is typically a very stable bilateral relationship.
So Canada's motivation for this reversal seems pretty clear and pragmatic then. It looks like a calculated bid to ease those simmering tensions with the U.S. and, crucially, to restart negotiations on vital trade agreements with the Trump administration.
Absolutely. Canada's finance minister stated quite explicitly that this reversal would allow Canada to make vital progress in reshaping economic and security ties with the U.S. It clearly signals a desire to avoid a costly trade dispute.
And time was a factor too, wasn't it?
Yes. Prime Minister Mark Carney further underscored the urgency, emphasizing that eliminating the tax supports renewed negotiations targeting a July 21st deadline. That deadline was a key outcome set at the recent G7 summit.
The stakes are undeniably high here. Annual bilateral trade between the U.S. and Canada totals a massive CAD $1.3 trillion.
It's huge. And prominent business groups, including the Business Council of Canada, had previously warned that this kind of unilateral digital taxation could significantly damage the intricately woven cross-border economic ties.
So this reversal vividly underscores the immense pressure smaller economies can face from larger trading partners.
Especially when the relationship is as fundamentally crucial as the one between the U.S. and Canada. It's a powerful demonstration of economic leverage and international diplomacy, really.
This incident also offers a perfect example for you, the listener, of how international tax disputes can directly affect the availability and cost of digital services you use daily.
Right, it's not just abstract policy.
If major companies face higher, potentially punitive taxes in one country, they might choose to pass those costs on to consumers. That could mean higher subscription fees or increased product prices.
Or they might just limit services in that region.
Exactly. They might decide to limit or alter the services offered there. It truly illustrates the intricate and often sensitive interconnectedness of global trade and digital commerce.
Okay, so from North America, our deep dive now spans the globe. First, let's go to the economic powerhouse of China, and then we'll look at the dynamic markets of Asia and Europe.
All right, let's turn our attention to China and its intricate and lately quite volatile tapestry. It's currently experiencing significant economic headwinds across multiple fronts. What's the latest on their manufacturing sector?
Yeah, the latest data indicates that China's manufacturing sector has now shrunk for a third consecutive month in June.
Third month straight.
Yes. The official Manufacturing Purchasing Managers Index, the PMI, that key indicator where anything below 50 signifies contraction. It edged up slightly to 49.7 from May's 49.5, but crucially it remains firmly below that 50-point threshold.
And what's driving that weakness?
This ongoing pressure is largely attributed to weak domestic demand, which is a persistent challenge within China's economy, and also those lingering U.S. tariffs. Despite a recent trade truce that aimed to, alleviate some of this friction, it seems it hasn't been enough.
So manufacturing is struggling. Is any other sector providing a counterbalance, maybe offsetting that weakness?
Well, there's a slight offset from the non-manufacturing PMI, which includes services and construction. That edged up to 50.5 from 50.3, slightly beating forecasts. So there's some resilience there.
But economists are still cautious.
They are. Analysts, whose insights our models track closely, warn that weaker exports and a fading fiscal impulse from past stimulus measures could weigh heavily on overall growth in the second half of the year. Goldman Sachs, for instance, expects no major new stimulus announcements, indicating a sentiment from Beijing that they seem resigned to a slow recovery.
And meanwhile, China's four-year housing crisis, well, it's being described as nothing short of a catastrophe.
That's the word being used. New home sales by the 100 largest developers were down a stunning 23% from a year earlier in June.
23%?
Yeah, amounting to 339 billion yuan, or about $47.3 billion US. And this follows an 8.6% annual drop in May. The effects of last September's stimulus measures are clearly fading, offering little lasting relief.
Has the government pledged more support?
Well, Premier Li Tang has pledged renewed efforts, but the general sentiment among analysts, which we corroborate, is that, quote, more support will be needed, but we don't expect a big shift in approach, end quote. This confirms China's apparent resignation to a drawn-out and slow recovery in housing.
This housing crisis raises a really critical long-term question about the very engine of China's economic growth, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. Goldman Sachs estimates that demand for new homes in cities could remain 75% below its 2017 peak in the coming years, and maybe even never return to those boom year levels.
Never. Why such a pessimistic outlook?
It's largely due to fundamental shifts, like a shrinking population and much weaker economic fundamentals overall. This could potentially signal the complete and permanent end of what has, for decades, been China's biggest driver of economic expansion and, frankly, citizen wealth creation.
The social ramifications of that are profound. It impacts average citizens' wealth, their confidence, could create potential for broader social unrest if it's not managed carefully.
Definitely. And this is where the in-depth analysis gets really interesting, pointing to what might be a deliberate choice on China's part. Robin J. Brooks, a senior fellow at the Brookings Institute, makes a compelling argument that China chooses deflation. Can you unpack this seemingly counterintuitive assertion for us?
Sure. Brooks explains that China was actually already on the verge of deflation, that sustained drop in prices, even before the latest round of U.S. tariffs hit. And these tariffs will only hasten that dynamic. He dives into the impossible trinity concept.
Ah, yes, the trilemma in international economics.
Exactly. It's a core principle stating a country can generally only achieve 2 out of 3 goals simultaneously: an independent monetary policy, a fixed exchange rate, and free capital movement. China's de facto peg of the yuan against the dollar means it struggles to achieve all 3.
So if China wants to maintain its currency peg and control capital flow, it has to sacrifice independent monetary policy. Is that the crux of Brooks's argument?
That's precisely it. Brooks argues that China is essentially accepting deflation rather than easing monetary policy significantly.
Why would they do that? Isn't easing usually the response?
Because easing monetary policy, like cutting interest rates or printing more money, would inevitably cause the yuan to fall against the dollar. That's a devaluation that China explicitly doesn't want, as it could trigger capital flight and financial instability.
Ah, okay. So they're choosing price stagnation or decline over currency instability.
Exactly. They seem to be choosing to endure deflationary pressures to maintain their currency peg, despite the adverse consequences for their domestic economy. This decision to prioritize yuan stability over domestic stimulus makes a fall into deflation much more likely, and a prolonged, slow recovery almost inevitable.
So if you're wondering how China's economic stability, or maybe the lack thereof, might affect you, our listener, think about global supply chains.
Right?
A struggling Chinese economy, marked by reduced manufacturing output and waning domestic demand, could ripple through worldwide. It impacts the flow of goods, it could drive up production costs for many companies.
And ultimately affect the prices of goods you buy every day, from electronics to clothing. It's just such a critical component of the global economic machinery.
Definitely. Now, beyond the sheer economic numbers, China's internal political and social dynamics are equally compelling and carry immense geopolitical weight, particularly the anniversary of its ruling party and a looming spiritual succession.
Right. Today, July 1st, marks the 104th anniversary of the Chinese Communist Party's founding. What does the party's latest membership data reveal about its current state and appeal?
Well, the official data shows party membership is just over 100 million now. It's up 1.1% from the previous year. However, our analysis reveals that the rapid growth, which really characterized earlier decades, has notably slowed down.
And why the slowdown?
It's attributed to more stringent recruitment measures under Xi Jinping's rule. It seems to be a deliberate effort to consolidate power and ensure ideological purity, rather than just maximizing the sheer number of members.
What drives individuals to seek party membership these days, especially given the current economic climate you just described?
The allure of party membership remains significant, and it seems deeply rooted in pragmatic considerations. It's long been considered a gateway to stable employment in China's sprawling state bureaucracy.
The Iron Rice Bowl.
Something like that. It's a particularly attractive prospect amid sluggish economic growth, record youth unemployment, and a weakening private sector, all things that narrow alternative career paths.
And the competition is fierce. I assume.
Incredibly fierce. Nearly 2.6 million candidates recently sat for national civil service exams for fewer than 40,000 positions. That really highlights the scarcity and desirability of those state-backed careers.
And for those who do manage to gain membership, what are the tangible benefits, besides the job security?
Well, for members, the benefits are clear and tangible. They earn about 20% more on average, they enjoy faster wealth accumulation, and they gain preferential access to vital resources and networks.
The real advantages.
Absolutely. And crucially, job stability now seems to outweigh salary for many graduates seeking security in this uncertain economy. However, despite these benefits, Xi's efforts to restore what he calls revolutionary zeal have reportedly caused some grumbling among cadres
Rumbling about what?
about stifling political rituals and diminished autonomy within the party structure. This internal discontent, coupled with the stricter screening, has kept membership growth well below the 3% annual increases we saw before Xi took power back in 2012. It signals a trade-off between loyalty and broad appeal.
It's also notable that party membership, while clearly a boon domestically, is increasingly becoming a liability internationally.
Precisely. The U.S., for instance, has begun revoking visas for Chinese nationals with alleged party ties, especially in sensitive research fields. They view party affiliation as a potential national security risk.
Yet at home,
You'd add at home, the party's influence remains, well, deeply embedded. It oversees virtually all aspects of public life, from ministries and state-owned enterprises right down to individual villages.
it's pervasive.
It is. As veteran China analyst Bill Bishop astutely observes, quote, "When people talk about how much support the party has in China, they should consider how many other people are dependent on each party member. Very quickly, you are into the hundreds of millions of people," end quote. That paints a picture of a vast, interconnected web of dependency and control that extends far beyond those official membership numbers.
Okay, and now, shifting gears but remaining within China's intricate dynamics, let's turn our attention to a profoundly significant spiritual and geopolitical event, the 14th Dalai Lama's succession. He prepares to celebrate his 90th birthday on July 6th. What's drawing global attention to this particular occasion?
Well, global attention is turning to what could be a historic announcement during a major three-day gathering happening right now of over 100 Buddhist religious figures. This gathering is widely expected to address the critical question of his reincarnation and succession.
An event laden with centuries of spiritual tradition, but also decades of geopolitical friction.
Absolutely. And that friction, of course, primarily stems from Beijing's stance on this deeply spiritual process.
Right. The Chinese Communist Party has consistently insisted that it, and not the Dalai Lama or his followers, will determine his reincarnation.
Which is a direct challenge to centuries-old Tibetan Buddhist tradition. However, the Dalai Lama has made it unequivocally clear that he rejects any Beijing-chosen successor. He emphasizes instead the need for spiritual legitimacy for any future reincarnation.
And he's even suggested it might happen outside China.
Yes, he has even suggested his reincarnation may occur outside Chinese-controlled territory, possibly in India, where he has lived in exile since fleeing Tibet back in 1959. This assertion fundamentally undermines Beijing's claims of authority over the succession process.
So how are Tibetan officials and the Dalai Lama's followers preparing for this eventual transition, given Beijing's very determined stance?
Tibetan officials are already preparing for his eventual passing. They're establishing a comprehensive framework to oversee the search for his reincarnation that's a complex process rooted in ancient prophecies and visions.
And China's position?
China, for its part, labels the Dalai Lama a political exile with no right to speak for Tibetans. They've indicated that talks would only happen if he accepts Chinese sovereignty over both Tibet and Taiwan.
Terms he's rejected.
Terms flatly rejected by the Tibetan government in exile. It just illustrates the deep chasm between the two sides.
This sounds like an incredibly sensitive issue with profound implications beyond just religion.
Indeed. As the deputy speaker of Tibet's parliament in exile put it, quote, "China is trying to garb this institution for its political purpose." This reflects deep fears that Beijing will attempt to manipulate the reincarnation process to install a, quote, puppet spiritual figure, one who would serve Beijing's political agenda rather than the spiritual needs of Tibetans.
So, as the world watches, Tibetans brace for a new phase in their decades-long struggle.
A struggle for cultural and religious self-determination, one that may soon unfold without the direct presence of their most revered spiritual leader. It forces them to rely on the institutional frameworks they are now putting in place.
It makes you consider how the longevity of political and spiritual institutions, like the Chinese Communist Party on one hand, and the Dalai Lama's lineage on the other, profoundly influences geopolitical stability and cultural identity. These aren't just abstract concepts, they are forces that shape the very fabric of societies with repercussions that can ripple across continents.
Absolutely. Now, moving from the intricate dynamics of China, let's broaden our view again to significant trade developments shaping economic relations between major global blocs.
Okay, moving on to global trade tensions. Let's first look at the European Union and the United States. What is the critical deadline looming for these two economic giants?
French Finance Minister Eric Lombard has expressed some optimism that the EU could reach a comprehensive trade deal with the United States before a truly critical July 9th deadline.
July 9th. Why is that date so paramount?
Because that's when Washington is scheduled to impose sweeping 50% tariffs on nearly all EU goods. That move would represent a severe escalation of trade tensions.
50% on nearly all EU goods. That sounds quite punitive. What specific sectors would be hit hardest, and what's the rationale behind President Trump's proposed tariffs?
Well, these proposed tariffs, introduced by President Trump back in April under his re-emphasized policy of reciprocity, would also specifically target a 25% duty on cars, a massive blow to European auto manufacturers, and a 50% duty on steel and aluminum.
Wow.
Other significant sectors, like pharmaceuticals and aircraft, are also under intense scrutiny. The policy of reciprocity, as championed by the president, essentially means the U.S. will mirror or even exceed the tariffs or trade barriers it perceives other nations impose on American goods. The aim is to force what the administration considers a level playing field.
That's a stark proposition. What leverage, if any, is the EU exploring to try and avert this looming trade war?
Well, Lombard hinted strongly at energy cooperation being a key element in the negotiations to avert this.
Energy, how so?
He specifically suggested that increased European imports of American natural gas sourced from three major liquefied natural gas, or LNG, plants currently under construction in the Gulf of Mexico could be used as a significant bargaining chip.
So buy more U.S. gas to avoid tariffs.
Essentially, this increased energy trade could potentially be leveraged to avoid, say, the proposed 10% increase in customs duties on a broader range of goods. It offers a tangible economic benefit to the U.S. in exchange for tariff relief.
So both sides are talking, but is there a real sense of urgency to prevent a costly escalation? It sounds like the clock is ticking.
Absolutely. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has also expressed confidence in reaching a deal to prevent what would undoubtedly be a costly and disruptive transatlantic trade war.
But is the EU just hoping, or are they preparing for the worst?
Well, Lombard, while optimistic, also stressed the need for a firm stance. He revealed that initial countermeasures on about 22 billion euros of U.S. imports were actually put on hold, while a broader, more impactful retaliatory package was actively being prepared.
So they have a plan B.
It indicates that while they hope for a diplomatic resolution, the EU is fully prepared for a robust trade war if necessary. It shows a clear determination not to be caught unprepared.
Now, in contrast to the EU's predicament, the UK has already navigated its own trade discussions with the US, haven't they? What has their bilateral agreement achieved?
Yes, in contrast, the UK successfully secured its own preferential trade agreement with the US, which notably began just yesterday, Monday, July 1st.
So that's active now.
It is. Under this bilateral deal, British-made cars now face a significantly reduced 10% tariff, down from the 25% imposed on other countries under broader agreements. Additionally, aerospace companies like Rolls-Royce saw tariffs on critical aircraft parts and engines cut completely to zero.
Providing a substantial competitive advantage for them.
Exactly. It really highlights the Trump administration's preference for direct bilateral deals over those complex multilateral agreements.
Despite this progress for the UK in some areas, are there still sticking points in their trade relationship with the US? Did they get everything they wanted?
No, not quite. Despite these gains, Britain has struggled to secure reductions on U.S. steel tariffs. For them, frustratingly, those remain at 25%.
So steel is still an issue.
It is. UK officials have stated that discussions for a zero-tariff deal on steel are ongoing, but they caution that negotiations with the Trump administration remain complex. It suggests that not all sectors are receiving the same preferential treatment.
So as the July 9th deadline looms for the EU, and with the UK's ongoing negotiations, it's clear that both Brussels and Washington appear keen to avoid a full-blown transatlantic trade war.
Right, the rhetoric suggests that.
But time is indeed running out, and that policy of reciprocity is definitely reshaping global trade dynamics.
And imagine, for you the listener, the potential impact on consumer goods if these trade tensions escalate further, from car prices to everyday products.
It all gets passed on.
New tariffs usually mean higher costs, which are typically passed on to consumers. The U.S. policy of reciprocity is clearly forcing nations to reevaluate their trade relationships, potentially leading to a more fragmented global trading system.
Okay, finally, let's explore a fascinating case of market exuberance, as one Asian economy rides a remarkable wave of digital asset enthusiasm. South Korea's stock market has been making headlines. How has it performed in the first half of 2025?
It's really been quite the story. South Korea's stock market has had a stellar performance in the first half of 2025, emerging as Asia's undisputed best-performing market.
What was driving that?
It's driven by a potent and frankly somewhat speculative mix. Intense retail investor enthusiasm, post-election optimism following the new president's inauguration, and a speculative frenzy centered around digital assets backed by the national currency, the won.
What specifically has ignited this surge of retail investment? Is there one main catalyst?
The primary catalyst behind this surge appears to be the newly elected President Lee's bold pledge to allow the issuance of won-based stablecoins.
Stablecoins pegged to the Korean won.
Exactly. This policy shift, even before it's fully implemented, has unleashed a torrent of retail investment into companies perceived as direct beneficiaries of a future digital won ecosystem.
Even though the regulations aren't finalized yet.
Correct. This speculative behavior is occurring even before the government has finalized comprehensive crypto regulations, which injects a significant layer of uncertainty into the market.
We've seen some remarkable high flyers in this environment. Can you give us some specific examples of companies that have ridden this wave?
Certainly. Financial technology and digital asset-adjacent firms have seen extraordinary gains. KakaoPay shares, for instance, have more than doubled their value.
Doubled.
LGC&S, a major IT service provider, surged nearly 70%. Fintech security firm Aton gained 80%. And a prime example of the speculative nature is a mobile gaming firm called MFBet. It tripled in value after its subsidiary merely launched a dollar-pegged stablecoin specifically for casino games.
Just launching a stablecoin tripled the parent company's value.
Apparently so. And the benchmark Kospi Composite Index is now nearly 30% higher year-to-date, pushing it to a near 4-year high. It's also benefiting from broader tech-led rallies in AI and semiconductors. It's not just crypto.
And what's the role of the retail investor in all of this? Are they using significant leverage, borrowing to invest?
What's particularly striking from our analysis of market behavior is the sheer scale of retail investor participation and their increasing use of leverage.
They're going all in.
It seems that way. Emboldened by these fast-moving stocks and the rapid returns, they've ramped up their use of margin loans. That's borrowing money to buy more stocks, with these loans surging to 20.5 trillion won, or about $15 billion US.
That's a lot of borrowed money betting on the market.
It showcases both the market's incredible momentum and its inherent heightened risk due to all that speculative capital. However, much of this excitement, as our models indicate, is still based on potential policy changes, not finalized regulations. The underlying foundation remains uncertain.
Still, investor expectations seem to be largely stoked by key appointments and proposed legislation, right?
That's accurate. Investor expectations have been significantly stoked by President Lee's appointment of Kim Young-boom, a prominent pro-digital asset figure, as his chief policy advisor.
Sending a signal.
Exactly. Furthermore, there's a ruling party bill under consideration that would allow firms with as little as 500 million won in equity capital that's relatively small to issue won-based stablecoins.
And that's raised concerns.
Yes, this specific provision has raised red flags. Critics, whose warnings our analysis supports, argue that this low capital requirement could invite systemic risk from undercapitalized issuers. It could potentially lead to instability if they're not properly regulated and capitalized.
South Korea's existing crypto market is already quite active, isn't it? How does this fit into the broader picture?
Oh, it's huge. South Korea already ranks among the world's most active crypto markets. Around 20% of its population actively trades digital assets.
20%.
Yes. The sheer volume is staggering. Trading volume just in dollar-pegged stablecoins reached 57 trillion won. That's over $40 billion US in Q1 alone.
Wow.
This puts immense pressure on the Bank of Korea, the central bank, to accelerate its plans for a central bank digital currency, or CBDC.
A digital one, essentially.
A digital form of the country's fiat currency, issued and backed by the central bank. It's intended to provide a more stable and regulated digital currency option. A second pilot for their CBDC is reportedly already in the works.
The Bank of Korea governor has voiced some concerns, though, about this rapid development,
Yeah.
particularly the private stablecoins.
Indeed. The BOK governor has openly voiced concern about allowing non-bank entities to issue stablecoins, citing significant risks to capital flows and overall monetary policy stability.
And what about the traditional financial players?
While traditional financial institutions are eager to participate in this burgeoning market, they remain wary of the regulatory clarity, or rather the lack thereof. An analyst at Korea Capital Market Institute, whose caution we echo, warns that many crypto-adjacent stocks may be running ahead of fundamentals.
Meaning the stock prices are outpacing the actual business prospects.
Exactly. He stated, quote, "One-peg stablecoins are likely to be introduced, but how much that will boost earnings is questionable. Investor expectations seem overblown given ongoing regulatory uncertainty," end quote.
So it sounds like there's significant potential, definitely excitement, but also a substantial risk of a bubble forming here.
Our models and many experts are cautioning that froth may be building and Korea's crypto-powered rally may be seriously tested in the second half of this year.
What could test it?
Broader global economic uncertainty. Things like persistent U.S. tariffs, ongoing Middle East tensions, weakening Western demand. All of these could impact the global flow of capital and investor sentiment, potentially puncturing the enthusiasm.
It serves as a potent reminder, doesn't it, of both the alluring promise and the inherent risks of new investment frontiers, and how quickly public sentiment, fueled by speculation, can inflate or deflate asset values.
Absolutely. Okay, shifting focus now. As economic and political currents surge, so do the tides of conflict, both globally and, perhaps surprisingly, closer to home in the U.S. Let's walk through these critical updates.
All right, let's first look at international flashpoints. You mentioned the Middle East situation remains tenuous throughout the region. What specific incidents are we seeing?
Well, the situation is characterized by underlying instability and frequent localized flare-ups. There was a significant drone attack striking Tehran this afternoon, June 30th, 2025.
Today.
Yesterday afternoon, June 30th. Local residents reported witnessing a kamikaze drone attack, which is being claimed to have specifically targeted a senior IRGC official.
The Revolutionary Guard Corps. An attack on their leadership is highly significant.
Extremely significant. And what makes this particularly notable are observations from the day before. Anti-aircraft batteries throughout the city were seen engaging targets. What are analysts making of that activity?
Analysts are noting that this observed anti-aircraft activity adds considerable validity to the claims of small drones being used to target senior defense officials. It suggests a deliberate and sophisticated attack rather than just random activity.
Right, not just stray shots.
Exactly. Furthermore, reports from the night before suggested that Iranian leadership is continuing to crack down on spies and insurgents, carrying out attacks within Tehran. This indicates a persistent internal security challenge, even despite an existing ceasefire.
So internal factions or external actors are still actively attempting to destabilize the regime, even amidst broader diplomatic efforts.
Precisely. It's a developing situation, so few details are fully confirmed. However, the observed anti-aircraft activity strongly suggests a credible threat was indeed present. It indicates an ongoing and significant internal security challenge for Iran.
It makes you consider how even seemingly isolated incidents like this drone attack can be symptomatic of broader, simmering geopolitical tensions that could escalate at any moment. It really illustrates the volatile nature of the region.
Now, while these international events unfold, a shocking domestic incident in the U.S. offers a stark reminder of the complexities of threat assessment and, importantly, the peril of premature narratives in media interpretation.
Yes. Yesterday afternoon, June 30th, 2025, at approximately 1:30 p.m. local time, a small arms engagement was reported on Canfield Mountain just east of Coeur d'Alene, Idaho.
And firefighters responded to a brush fire.
Unknowingly maneuvering into what analysts later described as the kill zone of a deliberately laid ambush. Our analysis, drawing from detailed reports, indicates the fire itself had been intentionally started to lure authorities into that specific location. It set the stage for a premeditated attack.
And tragically, firefighters walked right into it. In that initial ambush, 2 firefighters were killed and several others were wounded.
A terrible outcome. Later, the body of a male individual, presumed to be the shooter, was recovered from the scene along with a firearm. This morning, the shooter was identified as Wes Rowley.
Now, this is where the analyst's crucial commentary regarding the language used becomes vital. Why we emphasize the importance of factual precision.
Exactly. While the term ambush is technically correct in describing the shooting, the analyst points out that it, quote, is also likely to imply that a classic L-shaped ambush was laid by a professional military force, end quote. Which, they stress, was not what happened at all.
So what did happen, according to the clarification?
Instead, the shooter apparently briefly spoke to firefighters who were arriving on the scene, then climbed a tree, and then engaged them with a shotgun from close range. This distinction is incredibly important for accurate threat assessment.
And this clarification is particularly relevant given the immediate public response and especially the media speculation that followed.
It is. The analyst emphasizes that, quote, while horrific, this incident does not bear the hallmarks of a more professional and sophisticated terror attack, end quote.
That's crucial context.
Especially considering that many people across the nation are currently concerned with various threats of organized terrorism. This horrific attack, rather, seems to have been the result of one individual. His success relied not upon complex military planning tactics, but simply on the fire department, understandably not expecting to arrive at a brush fire and find someone actively shooting at them from a concealed position.
The critique of the media's response here is also very strong and speaks to the broader challenges of information dissemination during a crisis.
It's a critical observation. The analyst points out that, quote, even before the shooter's identity was even known, many journalists were pushing a narrative for political purposes, even as the incident was ongoing.
Pushing what kind of narrative?
Attempts to paint the situation as, quote, some sort of crazed militia activity related to white supremacy groups or the general idea of such, end quote. And the analyst notes, even now, a full day after the attack and knowing the shooter's identity, many news organizations have not issued corrections to their articles that push that initial unverified narrative.
It highlights a concerning trend of shaping narratives prematurely, based on assumptions rather than verified facts.
Definitely. And the analyst's key message for all of us is profound, and it resonates with our mission here at the Deep Dive. Quote, in the heat of the moment, the underlying politics and ideology are less important than the situation at hand, end quote.
Handle the crisis first, analyze later.
Exactly. Political discussions, they argue, are best served after the situation is resolved, not while bullets are still whizzing by overhead. It's also easy to forget, they add, that regardless of the suspicious nature of attacks like this, at the end of the day, real people are dead.
It's a stark, crucial reminder of the undeniable human cost of these events, often lost in the rush to define or politicize them.
It is, and we should probably remember this, as the analyst forewarns, multiple sides will seek to spin this event to suit their narratives.
Which prompts you, our listener, to consider how you consume and interpret breaking news, especially when initial reports might be shaped by pre-existing biases or political agendas rather than a clear, impartial presentation of the facts on the ground. Critical discernment of sources is more vital than ever.
Absolutely.
Okay. These events, from global financial shifts to regional conflicts and these domestic tragedies, continuously shape our understanding of the world. So we've covered a lot of ground today.
Maybe certainly have.
From the unprecedented decline of the U.S. dollar and America's mounting debt to Canada's economic recalibration and those nuanced policy decisions shaping North American trade.
Then we shifted focus to China's complex economic headwinds, its manufacturing struggles, that housing catastrophe, and the deliberate choice, perhaps, of deflation, alongside its intricate socio-political fabric marked by the CCP's anniversary and the profound implications of the Dalai Lama's looming succession.
Right. And finally, we explored global trade tensions between major blocs, that fascinating, yet potentially risky, crypto-powered market surge in South Korea.
Before examining the tense situation in the Middle East and that sobering domestic incident in Idaho.
It's undeniably clear how diverse economic, political, and social currents are interconnected, constantly reshaping our global landscape.
Indeed. Now, as you reflect on today's comprehensive exploration, what stands out most to you? Why is understanding these complexities and the crucial nuances within them so vital in navigating our rapidly evolving world today? In an era where information spreads instantly but true understanding, well, that takes time and deep analysis. What role do you play in fostering clarity over chaos?
That's a good question.
Consider how a deep dive into diverse sources, even conflicting ones, can reveal underlying patterns that challenge your initial assumptions, whether those assumptions pertain to economics, politics, or conflict. Ultimately, it prepares you for the critical questions tomorrow might bring.
Well said. If you found this deep dive valuable today, we sincerely encourage you to like and subscribe to the Deep Dive. Your support really is invaluable as we continue to explore the intricate layers of our world.
And if you'd like to help keep our analyses coming, please consider donating on our GoFundMe page.
Thank you for diving deep with us today.